Rush Limbaugh accusing CNN of trying to scare white Americans about the future of their country. You heard that right. Limbaugh objecting to reporting about the shifting racial landscape within this country. Minorities are definitely growing, certainly here in the United States. In fact, here's the current breakdown of the population by race. Whites are still more than 63%, but census data shows that last year, this is for the first time in history, more than half the children born in this country are racial and ethnic minorities. So recently, an article on CNN.com addressed the Latino population boom and what it means for the Republican Party. And Limbaugh, he called the article an implied threat. Here he was.
But it is clear that this and other similar stories like this are meant to serve as a warning to Republicans and conservatives. And the warning is you are on the wrong side of history. And you are on the wrong side of demographics. You better do what the coming majority wants right now, or you're going to suffer the consequences. There is an implied threat in this story.
An implied threat, he says. I want to bring in CNN contributor Ruben Navarrete Jr. Ruben, welcome. You wrote this article, this opinion piece on CNN.com. People can read it, slamming Limbaugh's comments, and that was just a portion of what he said. What is it that you disagree with so strongly?
Great to be with you, Brooke. I'll tell you, I disagree with the whole premise, this idea somehow that, one, if you're a news agency, a columnist, a pundit, and you bring attention to a very important historic news story, that somehow you're automatically sort of, trying to divide the country or make victims out of people. We're just doing our job. We're telling the news. But beyond that, this idea somehow, this nonsense that minorities want to get in power and then get even and take over is just not factual. I've been writing about this stuff for 20 years. I've never heard a single member of a minority group ever talk about getting even or paying back past injustices. They simply want a seat at the table. That's all they want.
Want a seat at the table. Let me give our viewers just a little bit more context. So Limbaugh, he was seizing on this quote specifically in the CNN article about a week ago from a gentleman by the name of David Basidis, a researcher at a think tank that studies the effect of minorities in politics. Let me read what this gentleman said. Quote, "The Republicans' problem is their voters are white, aging and dying off. There will come a time when they suffer catastrophic losses with the realization of the population changes." Isn't that, though, really an overgeneralization of the Republican base? I mean, why can't their makeup, right, evolve as the population, the demographics evolve?
That's a very good point. That's not my quote. I wouldn't have said that once. It's inflammatory. It goes too far.
So you
it's
disagree?
Needlessly provocative. But beyond that, as you say, what's to stop the Republican Party from getting religion, so to speak, and bringing in more Hispanics into the party, taking the right position from this point on? So it's not necessarily, the die is not necessarily cast. We're getting close to the point where it is. I think the quote was probably unhelpful, but so was Limbaugh's interpretation of the quote. He just went way too far.
Now, I don't have Rush Limbaugh sitting next to me, so he can't say exactly what he meant, but it seems to me when you hear the whole thing, he wasn't saying that white people ought to be afraid. He was accusing CNN specifically and the rest of the mainstream media of saying that. Isn't he being a bit more nuanced than maybe you're giving him credit for here?
Yeah, I listen to Rush every single day. I got to tell you, I really like a lot of what he says. I agree with him on some issues, disagree on other issues. But really, when he talks about race and ethnicity, he tends to go off the rails, and he did in this particular case. His message is pretty clear, that somehow CNN was trying to warn older white voters, listen, you better fall back in line here. You better give the emerging minorities everything they want, including, as he called it, amnesty for illegal immigrants. Or, believe it or not, one day you're going to pay for it because you're going to be in the minority. And folks are going to do to you what you've done to folks over the last generations. I don't agree with that. It's not realistic. It's not something I've ever heard from people. It's just a paranoid fantasy that people like Limbaugh are advancing. It's just not fair, not accurate.
Now, bigger picture here, in the United States, there ideas like Black unity, Latino solidarity, those are, groups and cultures and ideals that are praised. But you don't exactly hear a bunch of white people getting together and praising a group of whites. I mean, is there a perception in this country that Caucasians cannot rally and advocate for their own race?
Right. One of the disturbing things that I've had to keep track of is, people, as you say, Caucasians, whites have typically made the argument that minorities are too quick to see themselves as victims. And they're absolutely right about that. I agree with them on that. But the first chance they get, they as whites turn themselves into victims. They see themselves as being victimized by the fact that there's a black group or a Hispanic group, or that somehow candidates are pandering to one group or another. They really can't have it both ways. They can't decry the idea of becoming victims until they get a chance to be one.
But what about simply rallying around themselves? Why is that not accepted?
Well, it's not accepted, I think, typically because of the history of groups like that in this country and the fact that there was a time where when a bunch of white people got together, particularly in the American South, it was to the detriment of non-whites. But that's not what's applicable here. Those groups, those Hispanic groups and Latino African-American groups, to my mind, they're not very effective either. They don't really speak for the people they pretend to speak for. We are a much more complicated and nuanced group. And your original point is exactly right. Who's to say you can't have Hispanics voting Republican if you produce the right kind of Republican for them to vote for?
Exactly. Watch the demographics evolve within perhaps the Republican base as well. Ruben Navarrete, folks can read your article at CNN.com/opinion. Appreciate it. Thank you.